I really internalized that and
Yeah.
was thinking like, what's wrong with me that I'm not able to soothe my child?
Mm.
And like, I'm not a good mother. I'm not doing this right. I don't want to do this anymore.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. Hey everyone, so my guest today is the lovely Andrea. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you being here and I'm so excited to hear about your recipe as well as your story. Before we do that though, for anybody who doesn't know you, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I'm Andrea Knox. I'm a mom of two. My kids are 8 and 11. I'm also a marriage and family therapist, kind of on hiatus right now while I'm an intermittent stay-at-home mom and also an author. And yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. So this is actually a perfect time for our shameless plug, which I'll do the little visual here for you. But for anybody who is looking for your services, so you practice here in California, correct?
Yes, I'm not currently seeing clients. So
Okay.
I'm mainly in like an author and educator role right now.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the books as well as anything else that you offer, any socials. Where can people find you?
Okay. So this is the book. You'll bounce right back. The subtitle is The Motherhood Myths That Fail Us and the Tools We Need Instead. It's a book about preparing expectant moms for motherhood and also to help moms in the first year of parenthood adjust to parenthood. It's filled with skills and tools. There's a ton of research, and it's basically talking about what is parenthood really like. How can you get support for yourself and get prepared in a way that is authentic to you?
I love that. So where can people find your book?
It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, like most of the online places you find books. It's also in a physical bookstore in San Diego called Camino Books.
Wonderful. That's so exciting. Any social medias that people can follow you or websites that they can see kind of some of the services or any of that?
Sure. My website is andreaknox.com and my Instagram is Andrea Sumara Knox, andrea.sumara.knox.
Perfect. And as usual, we'll have all of those linked to our show notes, so make sure to check that out if it resonates with you. All right. So I'm really excited. I have never had this particular recipe. So tell me what you're teaching me today and why you chose this one.
Okay. All right. So we're making Portobello pizzas. It's every time my husband and I sit down and eat this meal, we're like, this is just like so nourishing and hearty.
Okay.
And it's pretty. So it's not that hard to make. It looks appealing. It feels good when you eat it. And it's something I can eat because I have like a year and a half after my daughter was born, who's my youngest, I developed a metabolic disorder and I don't regulate insulin correctly.
Okay.
So I have to eat a very low carb diet, like basically a keto diet, not for like a hot beach bod or anything, just for like,
for survival.
For survival. So it eliminates like traditional pizza crust and bread and pasta and all the like delicious things in life.
Yeah.
So I have found some recipes that are alternatives to carbs that are also like really yummy and my husband will eat. And so it just fulfills a lot of needs for our family.
Wonderful. And I know that you had kind of a way that you've modified it to have the kiddos involved too, if it's not something that they will eat necessarily.
Oh yeah, they will not eat it. I think every time we make this, my daughter looked over and was like, that's disgusting. So my
kids are good that way.
Yeah. My kids are picky eaters. So we're like, I will just disclose, like, I'd really love if we all sat down to one family meal, but that's not our reality. Like my kids eat kid food and I eat my weird diet and my husband like is along on the journey. So my kids definitely don't eat this. So at the same time that we make this, we usually make kid pizza with just like a pre-made dough from Trader Joe's or something,
Okay.
and put the same sauce and the same cheese and cook it at the same time. So we're kind of resembling the same meal at the same time, and we can kind of like knock it all out at once.
Absolutely. And it sounds like in that way, you're able to kind of meet multiple needs, multiple dietary needs as well, but still kind of have that kind of inclusivity and togetherness.
Yeah.
Which is really neat. And I love that idea. Okay. So tell me kind of the basic steps and I'll get going while we chat.
Okay. So you already prepared the mushrooms. So typically you would want to rinse the mushrooms, pat them dry. I suggested using like a dark towel or paper towels because I have stained a bunch of my white towels with these mushrooms. And then you put them face up with the gills up. You spread a thin layer of sauce on. They release quite a bit of juices when you cook them, so you don't want to put too much sauce, otherwise it's going to get like kind of too juicy.
Okay.
So just like you would regular pizzas, if this is the crust, put a thin layer of sauce on. I add Italian seasoning just to spice up the sauce a little bit. And then you put your toppings on, and then the cheese. And then I typically garnish with some basil on top.
Okay.
My husband and I have a debate about if the toppings go under the cheese or on top. And so he'll be very excited if he listens to this that I'm saying to put them under the cheese because they.
Okay. Is that his preference?
That's his preference.
I love it.
So because he's worried that they will like slide off as they cook, which he's not wrong. So, but I feel like they're more flavorful on the outside of the cheese. So today we're putting them under the cheese so they don't slide. And then you bake them, and that's pretty much it.
I love it. And I also heard you say in there, he's not wrong, which I'm sure is, a little pro for him too. Shout out. Okay. So I can get this going. And while I do that, I'd love to hear more about your story. And it sounds like it's very much maybe kind of a catalyst for you writing your book. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that is a fair statement. Yeah.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about, because it sounds like some of your journey involves kind of expectation versus reality, which I think is a very real thing when we're talking about parenthood.
Yes, completely.
So walk me through it. Kind of where does your journey start, and kind of in that sense, some of the challenges that you had to overcome, it sounds like.
Okay. Yeah. So when I became a parent, I was prepared for like the glossy version of parenthood. Like it's going to be the happiest time of my life. It's going to all come naturally. My body will bounce right back. It's going to be like glorious, right?
Yeah.
And we worked hard to have a baby, and I think that put even more pressure on that to expect that this was like a really like seamless and just positive transition. So when I had my first child, the transition to parenthood was so much harder than I expected. Okay. And I was just shocked. I was shocked by the reality of what parenthood was. And also like really struggled with the impact of sleep disruption and the constancy of parenthood, and just how much my life felt like it was just completely different. Yeah. So I developed postpartum depression and anxiety, which I had some biological predisposition for, but I think really the catalyst for that was just how shocking it was, and how much my expectations were so much different from what the reality was. Yeah. So
I'm super curious for you, and I know everybody's journey is a little bit different, but some of your expectations going into it, was there a particular source that you kind of built some of those expectations for that kind of wasn't true in that sense? Like where were you getting kind of your narrative in that sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. My family, my mom and my sister had kind of unique parenting experiences. So I felt like, and they had a really hard time. So I felt like that wasn't really an accurate source for me, because I thought my experience might be different. So I was kind of just like grabbing it from the air, what are the messages that society is providing? What am I seeing? not that I like was really attached to media, but you know, as you're like passing the magazine rack or like watching TV, there's a portrayal of motherhood that it's like that it's so natural and beautiful and blissful, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where it came from. It's just like from society and culture and media around me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important because that's where a lot of us get our information. You know, sometimes you might have even other sources, other people that are close to you that are saying, oh, this was my experience. And so they kind of, so that's going to be it. And we accept that as like gospel almost, like, okay, so this is what I'm expecting. And so when you, it sounds like kind of enter into that decision of, you know, trying to bring a kiddo, you know, into your family, it sounds like you're kind of going into it with like, oh yeah, I'm signing up for this. This is what I'm signing up for.
This picture right here. Yeah.
Right. The thing I saw on TV, you know, where everyone's happy, there's no yelling.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that's what I signed up for.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll also say like I didn't have a lot of people around me, my family excluded, but who were being honest about like, it's amazing, but also it's really hard, you know, and like, this is what I'm struggling with. So I just feel like that's kind of a cultural norm to not be so forthcoming. Like there's a lot of stigma around talking about the struggle.
Yeah. What? So, I mean, I have my ideas, which is the whole reason for this podcast.
Yes.
But I mean, in your experience, why do you think that was? Why is it so taboo and that most people's instincts is to then kind of continue this facade?
What a question. I think there's a lot of reasons. So I think one is like the cultural idea of motherhood, like it's the pinnacle, or parenthood. But I think especially for mothers, like it's the pinnacle of femininity, right? It's like the thing to do.
Yeah.
And even though that's not true for everybody, but I think it's portrayed that way. It's like the ultimate expression of femininity to be a mother. And it's so to, even though like I think kind of gender roles and concepts are kind of like shifting now, and I think we're still pretty invested in that idea, and that's been around for so long. It's been since like biblical times.
Yeah.
So we're just not quite letting that go. So to speak out against that, and to be in America where we're so individualistic and do everything ourselves, and now there's social media that makes everything look perfect, and effortless. So like it's from all these different angles that there would be sort of an agreement of silence around that.
Yeah. And I think that agreement, like you mentioned, is something that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of until it's happening. And then it's, you know, it becomes even more isolating because no one else is talking about it. So I shouldn't, you know, I feel like so many of us are kind of in this habit of don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to then be the one person that's speaking out, like that's scary to kind of break that norms. And so I can absolutely appreciate where, like you said, it's just almost even subconsciously we're continuing on this idea, this narrative, and I'm tired of it.
Me too. I feel you on that. Yes. Yeah. It's time to speak up. Even if some of the silence is like good natured, you know, like I don't want to like impose my experience on you as your mother or your aunt or whoever, you know, like it's still, I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah.
Anymore.
And I think that's a good point because I have heard from people, well, I don't want to scare you. You know, again, it's not ill intentioned.
Yeah.
But like you said, it does kind of maybe have other consequences that we don't quite realize from it. So I think that's a great point. I'm super curious for you. You had mentioned kind of working with and struggling with some of the postpartum. And so again, I know everybody's kind of presentation looks a little bit different. Would you be willing to kind of share a little bit of some of the symptoms that you saw for yourself as far as, you know, if someone is maybe questioning for themselves, like, is this Should I be concerned? Should I, maybe get some help? Like, what did that look like for you?
For me, yeah. And that is a good point that it doesn't look the same for everybody. But I think like for the depression piece, I felt sad. I felt a lot of shame. I felt like low self-esteem around parenthood.
Okay.
And I felt like I was dragging. I was just like dragging in a fog. In terms of the anxiety, I felt like I was really irritable.
Okay.
I had a hard time figuring out like how to leave the house because my first child was pretty fussy, and he would just cry like for like 45 minutes.
Wow.
And I would never know when it would happen, and there wouldn't be a reason why. Like his diaper would have been changed, his temperature would be regulated, he would have been fed, but he just had trouble regulating himself sometimes. So I would be so fearful that one of those things would happen, that it would just feel like paralyzing to leave the house.
Yeah.
And when I went to a baby and me yoga class when after I first had him, and I mentioned this story in my book too, but like all the we would be like doing yoga, and then like at the end of the class it'd be like down to a whisper, and like all the babies would be getting calm, and then we'd do like a meditation, and my baby would be the only one crying. So
oh goodness. That's so hard.
Yeah. So I really internalized that, and was thinking like, what's wrong with me that I'm not able to soothe my child? And like, I'm not a good mother. I'm not doing this right. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So it just like, I think the thoughts would kind of like cascade into a really bad place instead of realizing like, hey, my baby's just having trouble regulating himself. Like I'm doing a great job. It's just that he's having a hard time. So, so my thoughts got dark. I was sad. I was like tearful. Like it was a pretty wide spectrum of experiences.
And I imagine that doesn't make it, super easy. You're in an environment where literally you've got people to compare yourself to right next to it. And like you said, if they're all, all soothed, and here's your baby who's really struggling in that moment to be able to kind of on sleep deprived brain. So your brain isn't at its best just in general.
Right.
Because of the environmental circumstances and just, that's kind of a thing. And then to kind of add, like you said, in order to kind of reframe that and to be able to access that logic of, hey, it's not you, this is just a particular growing pain that you guys are having to work through together.
Yeah.
It can be really easy for us to, like you said, kind of get stuck into, well, they're able to do it, so it must be a me thing.
Yes, exactly.
It must be some sort of deficit. And that's, oh gosh, that's such a lonely headspace to be at.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Very isolating. It feels like I'm the only one who's not able to do this naturally or well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like more depression inducing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this vicious cycle that's hard to get out of.
Yes. In fact, there's research to support that. Like when you are hard on yourself about having bad thoughts about parenthood, that it is more likely to lead to depression instead of having like self-compassion.
Yeah. And that's a really stinky fact.
Yeah.
Like you said, just the fact that self-compassion just becomes further and further away. Yeah. That's so hard.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing something like parenthood, where, I don't know about your experience, but it takes a very high degree of self-compassion when you're in it and you're doing the whole parenting thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you may not have cultivated that skill before parenthood, or you may not know that that's what you're supposed to do, or that, like it's okay to have these thoughts. So I think that's why it's so important to be vocal about parenting experiences that are hard, so people know.
Yeah. So okay, so this is, you were struggling with the postpartum. Walk me through kind of the rest. How did this kind of unfold for you? What are some other things that you had to kind of figure out and navigate?
Well, I saw a therapist. It was like really hard. I don't know if you can relate to this, but being a therapist and needing to see a therapist, like that's fine. But I still have this concept of like, I am the one who provides for other people and like I shouldn't be having this experience, but I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very helpful. Of course it was.
That's why, I think that's why they say we make the worst patients too.
Yeah, definitely.
We're similar in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I needed support. I had lined up zero support.
Okay.
So I needed somebody to give me breaks and to help me. So I finally reached out for that and things got a lot better. So
yeah. So you mentioned kind of not having lined up support. Is that by nature, or tell me a little bit about kind of that support piece, if you would?
Yeah, I just thought I could do it all on my own, And
Gotcha.
I was like, we did the classes, we did baby CPR, we set up the nursery, we got all the gear, and I just thought we would be fine. Like I was a very independent person. My husband also is. We were just like, we got this. You know? Like, why would we need help? I almost took when people would ask me, like a medical provider, like, do you have support after the baby? It's like a routine question, right? And I'd be like, do they think I can't handle this? Like, I got this.
It's almost like a point of pride, it sounds like.
Sure,
right? Like,
sure.
yeah.
And also just a complete not knowing of what was like what I would need and what was reality. So, like, of course, being the only one watching a baby 24 hours a day with like, I had my spouse, but, he had to go back to work. And so like him being like inundated with me being like, when he came home, like, take the baby.
Yeah.
It just, that wasn't enough support for us, just the two of us. So, so I hadn't asked anybody, I hadn't hired anybody. So, so then I was like, okay, I really need help. So that's when I did it after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment for you that was that aha kind of willingness to change that mindset from I don't need the help to, yeah, I think I do?
There was actually like a very clear moment because my pediatrician for my son was like just so wonderful in asking like very indirectly, as he's checking my baby, like, and how are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm okay. I have my down days. And he's like, down days? What are those? What does that look like? So he told me, he's like, you're spending too much time with the baby. Like you need support for you.
Yeah.
So that was the first person to tell me directly, like, oh, like that's okay to need support and like you could really use it.
Yeah.
So I literally had a person tell me, like, you need this. So I was like, oh, I need this. Okay, this is okay. All right. I guess like now I have the permission. Not that I don't really like saying like it had to come from another person, but it did give me permission to say like, okay, this is something that I need and I can get that for myself.
Yeah. And I love that you just used that word, because I was just going to ask, did it feel like permission to be able to reach out? And it sounds like, you kind of preemptively, that's kind of where you were at.
Yeah.
And, I hear you saying that, not that we need somebody else's permission to do it, but sometimes I can absolutely appreciate when you're in that mindset, it's really hard. Like you said, the self-compassion, we go back to that, to give yourself that permission yourself that it might not be something you can access in those moments. And so sometimes it does take that external person saying, it'll be okay if you ask for help. It doesn't make you any less than or mean that you're a failure in some way, shape, or form because you're asking for help. Because again, normalize, right, guys? Like normalize getting the help, because that's totally okay. And that's actually well needed.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. So he tells you, let's get you some help. Was that an immediate shift? What was your journey? Kind of what did that help look like for you in order to find some of that relief?
So initially I turned to my husband and he was like, I'm not sure that I really can like provide all the help that you need. Like I think maybe we need to go outside of ourselves. So I had a friend who said, I know a nanny who can probably help you. And I called her and she was available. So it was like,
oh, wow.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be like, the case for everybody that a resource will magically appear.
Yes.
But I think it also speaks to like when I had the courage to tell somebody else who was another mom what I was going through, she shared like, oh yes, of course. And I also struggled and here's somebody I know. So It was kind of like a powerful community moment of like, when we share honestly, we might get some resources shared back with us.
Yeah. That sounds like a really hard step to then go to another parent and open yourself up in such a vulnerable way.
Mm-hmm. It was, but I feel like most times that I did that, and it got easier and easier, and I just like started sharing more and more. It was just like a Me Too moment. Like, oh yeah, I had a hard time with that too. And it was very rare that somebody was just like, wow, you're really struggling, like.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe not getting as much of the judgment as you were kind of offering to yourself.
Yes. Yes. I was, making up the thoughts for all the people around me. Like, for example, in that baby yoga class, I was perceiving that everybody was like, judging me for not being able to soothe my baby, but that's probably not what they were thinking. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great reminder because absolutely, are there going to be people out there who are judging?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. You get those people like on the airplane, for example. I feel like that's an area that I've seen it where, you're kind of like, oh, quiet your baby. And it's like, I'm doing everything I can. Trust me, I want my baby to be quiet too. Right. So, there are definitely those people, but in your general circle, that if that is the response, perhaps they ought to be outside of your circle instead of inside, because like you said, that you need that band around you and not someone who's pushing you down and issuing that judgment, because we're good enough judging ourselves. We don't need other people doing it.
Yeah. Yes, completely.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that it sounds like you were able to kind of start finding some of that support. As you were going through some of that, did that kind of shift things in what way? So you started getting some of that support. How did the journey look like kind of through that, after that?
Yeah. I think just talking about it shifted something in me. Like I could let down that barrier of trying to hold it all together as if because if you looked at me in my early parenthood days, like I would have looked tired, but you would have assumed everything was fine unless you like ventured into my bedroom and found me crying, Okay. So I think it was like, it was a relief to let up that facade, to like let people in and let them know like, this is really hard. And also I got some breaks so I could like have my own thoughts and do something, even if it's just going to Target, on my own. And then eventually I was able to go back to work, and that for me that was like it fed me to be able to sort of like make a contribution into the greater world again.
Okay.
And yeah, I started realizing like, okay, this isn't just me that's experiencing this, these thoughts are just kind of spiraling, and I just kind of like got back on track. So it took time, but I did feel like a huge sense of relief almost immediately when I started talking and when I got more support.
Yeah. I heard you mention there that if people were to look at you on the outside, they wouldn't necessarily know. Was that a conscious decision that you made?
I think that's just how I operated,
In general, even before parenthood?
Yeah, I think that's just how I operated. But I will say, like, so after I recovered from this experience, I devoted my marriage and family therapy practice to supporting moms and families. And I would see a lot of that, like moms coming in with that who look like they're doing fine and they've got it all together. And if I pass them on the street, I think like they're doing fine, but then they let out their true experience and they're really struggling. So I think it's kind of I don't know if it may tie in with kind of like this cohort of parenthood where we're needing to make it all look like it's picture perfect, like it's on. I didn't even really use social media at the time, but still it feels like there's a pressure to like make it all look good.
Absolutely. And could you say more about maybe the importance of that reminder that even though, like you said, walking down the street, these people, you're like, oh, you got it together. No need to necessarily check in with those people. Can you say more about that? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think just as much as we make up other people's thoughts, we're making up their experiences and how they're doing. And we have to ask. We have to check in and ask to really know what is happening for them.
Yeah.
And create a space for an honest answer too. Like, not like a leading question, like, you're doing fine, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So could you say more about, for anyone who might be wanting to be that support, like what would be, instead of the, hey, you're fine, right? Like you said, like a leading question, what could be alternatives that if, any of the listeners are wanting to truly, be a support, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say an open-ended question. So like, how are you doing? Like, or even giving some permission to start with, like, it's such an exciting time, but I know there's hard times too. Like, what's the hardest for you right now?
Yeah.
Or like, if you ever want to talk about the hard parts, I'm here, just to say like, hey, I know that this is hard and I'm already putting that out there for you as sort of like I'm opening the door for you to talk about that stuff.
And it sounds like in it too, kind of normalizing. Yeah, it's hard. And hey, this is a safe space to be able to like say, and like you said, put down that facade that, yeah, this really stinks. And like you said, I mean, sometimes, I had another parent that chatted with me where, that idea of there might be moments where you say, I'm done. Like, I don't want this anymore.
Yeah,
please opt out.
Yes.
From that, and to be able to kind of create that, hey, that's okay too.
Yeah.
That sometimes those thoughts do come up because it's really difficult.
Totally. Yeah. That's actually how I opened my book, is talking about like how I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a mom anymore. Like, that's where it had gotten to. And, and it's okay to have those thoughts. So, and also I feel like some people say like, I don't know, like, let's say they had a sister or a friend who was a new parent and they weren't a parent themselves. And I think they feel like a little bit lost with like, I don't know how to support that person or ask. But anybody can ask and listen, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to be experienced or knowledgeable just to listen to the real experience. And that can make such a difference for somebody.
And that's a great point, because again, it's not necessarily that you have to relate to it, but just providing it sounds like that open conversation, the open, real conversation to, be able to start it and to provide that support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other pieces of support or resources that you found on your journey that were just really kind of top notch or really helped kind of change your world?
I'm trying to think for myself. I think my husband started like plucking the books out of my hands because I was, like, a serial reader, and I would get really hung up on like, okay, we need to do everything that these 3 books say all at once to be good parents, essentially. Like, I wasn't saying those words, but that's kind of the structure that was forming in my mind.
Absolutely.
So he would just be like, no, we need to stop reading that.
Yeah.
So, so I think like, I was able to like open myself up to like, okay, if I don't do it perfectly to the T, how this book or this model or this person in the grocery store, or my, sister-in-law or whoever is like presenting how I need to parent. If that's not working for me, that's okay. I don't have to do it all perfectly. And in fact, it's more important to do it in a way that's authentic to me and is actually accessible in the moment.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Because I think that's huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing I think about is like, there's just so many theories out there, like about parenting overall, or feeding, or solid food feeding, or sleep, and it's not all going to work for you. So, and if it doesn't, that's okay. It doesn't mean something bad about you or your family or whatever. It's just that at that moment, that's not working for you. So, and sometimes we don't have the energy for like a protocol for sleep training, and that's okay. That's all right. You can try again tomorrow, or in a week, or in a few months, or never, and all of that's okay, because you need to really just focus on what you have the capacity for, which can be limited.
Absolutely.
In many phases of parenthood.
So true. Such a good reminder too. And what I really love about what you're saying is it sounds like it has this degree of flexibility as well as creativity. And like you said, being able to kind of figure out maybe your core of, those non-negotiables, those values, if you will, and really operating from there, not necessarily having to have it look like you said, step by step. Oh, I read this in a book. I mean, I can absolutely relate to that. I'm a rule follower through and through.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, reading something like that, and they're like, okay, first you do this, and then this, and then, okay, I have to do it, and it has to be 1, 2, 3, versus being able to have that, creativity, that flexibility, and how does it fit for me and what's realistic, versus trying to go, well, the book said.
Right. Yeah. The book said thousands of kids have done this, and it's going to work for me. And it's your kids too, like, does your child, is this working for your child? Like, it just may not. It may not work. And so, or it may not work at that time. So it's sort of a dance of like, what is working for all of us right now? And how can we just like make this easier for ourselves while we're also moving towards our own goals for what parenthood and this, upbringing for this child needs to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a great point of just for that child, because what worked for one kiddo may not work for the next one.
Yes. In fact, it probably won't.
Yes, right? Because that's just kids.
Yeah.
So being able, again, it's really exercising that, it sounds like, that flexibility, that willingness to say it's okay if you're kind of coloring outside the lines and kind of what it looks like.
Yeah. And I think I liked what you said earlier about like core and values too, because I think that's really the most useful tool in parenting is like evaluating what are my values and what do I want my life to look like and my family's life to look like, and trying to align with that. And that, I feel like, just makes things a little easier for decision making, and feels like it's never going to be easy, because it's just not. But it feels more authentic, and there's a little more ease, I think, when it's coming from that place.
Yeah. So I'm super curious, was there a particular moment, or was it a little bit of all of these moments, that kind of was the catalyst for you then putting pen to paper and writing this book?
So, like I said, I started seeing moms and families in my therapy practice. I started getting educated, and I joined the board of a nonprofit for supporting perinatal mental health, the Postpartum Health Alliance. And so all of these experiences were so amazing, but also were sort of like supporting on the back end. Like once you're struggling, we're, providing support. So I just kept grappling with what can we do out front? What can we do preventatively and to prepare parents more? So I think, and initially I had started a postpartum planning business. I was like, okay, this will be it. And my beta client, who was a friend, we had like developed this plan of like, what will your needs be? What support will you have? Here are the resources available to you. What are the hardest parts going to be, like phase by phase in new parenthood. And then when she had her baby, she almost died. I was just like, I love planning, but it just doesn't always work out. So maybe that's not the key. So like, eventually what I came to is like, something I can offer is education and being real and getting out and saying like, hey, this is what parenthood looks like. And here are some skills and tools and resources that are available. So that's what this book is.
Yeah. And I really love that in it, you very much do start out with some of those really common myths and kind of bashing them, to pieces, which I love. Yeah. That's my goal. My dream, my pipe dream. But, and then being able to not only bash them, but then offer kind of alternatives instead. Yeah. And so I think that's, if that was your goal, I think that it, at least in my personal opinion, kind of right in line and being able to, like you said, kind of preemptively and preventatively kind of put some information out there that's a little bit more realistic and not just kind of, again, the theme sunshine and rainbows. Yeah. Because that's not, it is, there's a lot of beautiful aspects to it. Absolutely. Yes. But to kind of enter into, like you said, that mindset of, oh, it's just going to be, what I saw on TV or, what my neighbor had, oh, their kids are so great. It doesn't necessarily always work out that way. And there are a lot of things that happen that are unplanned. Like it sounds like you experienced with that client, that beta client, which is, rocks your world. And if we are just trying to follow this step-by-step plan, that makes it really difficult. Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people encounter that at birth. But it goes the whole way through, right? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just had a wonderful parent who was speaking about some of even the empty nesting. Again, it's supposed to look ABC, right? This is what they're supposed to do, but it doesn't necessarily account for all of the real things that go along with it, and some of the grief and the new growing pains that you don't anticipate, and that's not even on your radar when they're, 1, 2, even 10. Yeah, right. So absolutely. And I think that's so important just across the board when you're talking about parenthood. So my favorite question that I like to ask folks is that if you did have access to a DeLorean, you go back, is there anything specific that you would tell yourself to kind of prepare or to maybe even start shifting that mind a little bit sooner? I mean, I'd say I wrote you a book. I think the bottom line is like, hey, our culture doesn't do a great job of talking about the hard parts. It's a really unique time to be a parent, where there's a lot of pressures. And so it can feel really isolating if you're struggling, but you're not alone. And there will be really hard parts, but also there's things you can do. There's resources you can get. You can change things for yourself. But yeah, buckle up. Strap in. But it's, it is like you were just saying, it is all those things that it is the beautiful and it is the amazing and it is joyful, but that's just not the whole picture. Yeah. The whole picture is all of it, just like life. It's like all the emotions, all of the experiences. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. So, okay, I know you mentioned garnishing with basil kind of up top. Do you put that on top of the cheese? Do you wait till it's done? I just put it on top. Yeah. Okay. And then how long do you kind of bake these for?
It's I think like 8 to 11 minutes, just depending. So when we cook at a higher temperature with the kid pizzas, it's a little bit less. But I think if I remember right, it's at 350. It's like 8 to 11 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I am so excited to try this new recipe, and I'm so very, very grateful for you being willing to kind of help in this mission to pull back that curtain and share some of the real life struggles that is kind of what happens in parenting.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
yes, thank you so much. I really appreciated it. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.